I'm Roberta Dietzen. Stay tuned. Tape with Rabbi Doug is next.
We're gonna see Rabbi Doug. We're gonna see Rabbi Doug. We're gonna see Rabbi Doug on your TV tonight. But Daddy, I want to watch Monday Night Football.
Forget about Monday Night Football. There's no other thing we're gonna watch on Monday but Rabbi Doug.
Yeah, Rabbi Doug on TV tonight. We're gonna see Rabbi Doug. Oh, everybody talk about Doug.
Shalom and welcome to Taped with Rabbi Doug. I am here with author Roberta Dietzen. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Rabbi Doug.
Well, it is a pleasure, and I wanted to talk today about your latest book, Gypsy Music Street. This is such an enthralling book. Right when I picked it up and started to look at it, the whole idea of someone wanting to return to the city that was destroyed, that their family was killed in during the Holocaust, it's such a scary thing. At the same time, it's something that probably a lot of people have wanted to do, but have either been afraid to do or just vowed never to do. And I want to talk about this a little bit. The story has to do really with your mother. How do you say her name? Razi? Like
Reggie was.
What was her Jewish name? Was it Razel or Razel?
Rachel?
It was Rachel? Rachel? Okay, so Reggie.
Reggie was the Hungarian.
Reggie was the Hungarian.
They spoke Hungarian on the streets and Yiddish in the home.
And they actually, she was living in Czechoslovakia, actually,
at the
in
time.
the city of Munkacs.
Yes,
the city of Munkacs.
This was part of Czechoslovakia at the time when she lived there in the 30s.
So tell me now, your mother was living in Czechoslovakia at the time. The Germans came in. What happened to her and her family first during the war when she was experiencing all this living in that town itself?
Okay, well, let me explain.
Please.
My mother actually came to the United States on the eve of World War II in 1937. She came not knowing what was going to happen, just because she wanted a better life like most immigrants come, but she was a Holocaust survivor in the sense that she felt like she had abandoned her family.
So she came by herself and left the whole family behind.
She came from a large Orthodox religious family. She was one of 9 children, which was very typical of that time. And 2 of her siblings were living in the Chicago area. She had one brother who had immigrated to Israel much earlier. He was a pioneer in the early 30s. And she came and joined her 2 siblings here, but the remainder of her family stayed in Europe. And
were her parents still alive at this time?
Yes. Oh, yes. Yes. They were, you know, not that old, maybe in their late 50s. She came in 37, and the tragedy, of course, was that the Hungarian Jews, if you know their history, they were her family was one of the last deportations in May of 1944 that was transported to Auschwitz from this brickyard ghetto that was in Munkacs, and then within a few months the Russians liberated
the area.
And it became part of the Soviet Union.
So for the people who were living in that part of Czechoslovakia, they actually lived there unharmed during most of the war.
Yes, that was all the Hungarian Jews. They really, I believe that they felt that the war was coming to an end, which it was. That was the tragedy, really. Everyone knew that the Germans were losing the war, but Adolf Eichmann himself was intent on exterminating every last Jewish person he could get his hands on, despite the fact that they knew they were losing the war. He came to Munkacs himself and made sure that the Jews, within 5 days in May of 1944, they were was declared Judenrein, if I'm saying that correctly.
That's right.
Yes.
Free of Jews.
Yes. And this town, Munkacs, this was a city. My mother was always...
A big city with a lot of Jews.
Yes, it was about half, the population at the time was about 23,000, about half were Jewish. And you had Hasidic Jews, Orthodox Jews, Zionist Jews, and they were always arguing among themselves. But it was a very, my mother always said it was a very progressive town. The Jews enjoyed the same civil liberties as the Gentiles. It was not like Russia, they didn't have pogroms. Everyone got along very well together. While it was part of Czechoslovakia, it was a very progressive country. So while my mother lived there, she really never experienced, apart from the garden variety of anti-Semitism that, you know, many of us experience, they didn't have the same problems that they had in other parts.
What was your mother's thinking as being a young girl, getting on a ship, I presume, and coming to the United States and leaving? Did she think, you know, maybe I should get out of here before the Germans get here? Did she think, I just want to start something new and go and join my siblings who are already in the United States?
Right. She said they had absolutely no clue. They really, in 37, Munkacs is, I don't know whether it was because of the location of her city. It was in a very remote area of Czechoslovakia. It's in the Carpathian Mountains, in this valley that's surrounded by the mountains.
Such a well-known city. I mean, everybody who knows European history, the history of the Jews in Czechoslovakia, Hungarian history, everybody knows about Munkacs. It's a very well-known city.
I know. Well, there's a famous rabbi, Rabbi Chaim Shpira, and my mother knew him personally, and she used to talk about him all the time. And if you go to Israel, if you've been to Yad Vashem, when you walk in, there's a video of Munkacs, of his daughter's wedding. And my mother used to tell me stories about how thousands of people came from all over Europe for his only daughter's wedding, and it would go in one ear and out the other. And then one day I found on the internet there is a video of this wedding, the 1933 video of Rabbi Shpira's daughter.
Wow.
Shabbos zoekt aber, Teuses vermeders, Shabbos zocht eine. So hat ich kein Digme. So gerät meine Brüder in Amerika. Sollt halten Shabbos, es gibt's an. Man meint die Shabbos mit den Damen, nichts tun im Shabbos, es kommt halten Shabbos.
And you can see it today, and they have this right as you come into Yad Vashem in the entrance.
Wow.
That's the first thing you see.
Very nice, very nice.
Yeah.
So the story goes, your mother wanted to go back, and
In the worst way.
yeah,
really
she wanted to go back.
wanted-
She wanted to see the town she grew up in. She wanted to see the town that her family was exterminated from and where they were deported from. She wanted to see her old home if it still stood, and so on and so forth. Why didn't she ever go back?
Well, because at the end of World War II, the Soviets took control.
Right,
The borders changed.
Right,
and
the
you
borders
could
changed,
not-
and you couldn't cross the
Right.
borders. So
This area was
let me-
totally off limits.
Let me come back. What year did your mother pass away?
2007.
2007. So back in the early 90s, we had glasnost.
Right.
You could go to Russia, you could go to the other Soviet bloc countries once the Soviet bloc fell apart. Why didn't she go then?
Okay, let me explain. Well, basically because she was too old and too sick at that point. We, my husband and I, my family, had lived in Switzerland for 5 years, from 1984 to 1989. And she came to visit us, and we had a very nice life. It was beautiful in Geneva, Switzerland, and we were all excited to show her around, but she was not impressed. She just kept talking about how she wanted to go to Munkacs. And so I was a little naive at the time about the situation, and I looked into it. I made inquiries, not realizing how impossible it was, but that's exactly what it was. It was impossible to go there. It was completely off limits for foreign travelers. It was part of the Iron Curtain. So what happened was, that was maybe in '86 or '87, and the Soviet Union collapsed in 1990. Well, we moved back from Switzerland in '89, and she was just, her health had deteriorated by then, and it was just, her dream, her desire became just a dream. She knew that it was just too late for her to go back, but she really longed to go back there.
What was your inspiration, which is really the main theme of your book, what was your inspiration to do research into your mother's family's life, your grandparents' lives, their home, their residence, their city? What was your inspiration to really do a lot of research into it and to follow through as you did with your visits?
Well, I had the same desire as my mother had. My whole life growing up, I heard the stories about Munkachevo, and she would talk. Munkachevo is what the Ukrainians or the Russians call it, and Munkacs. And she would tell me the stories from the time I was a little girl about the beauty of the city, the Carpathian Mountains, the La Turica River. She always stressed this was a modern city. They had a new movie theater. She worked at this Hotel Star. She worked on the Corso. That was the main street. There was a Hotel Star, which we eventually stayed at when we went there. It's still there. And talked about the Corso was the main street. And the people would promenade there, and talk about all the characters. And she wanted to go back, and when she died, and she was a part of my life for so long, it was hard for me to let go.
She was living with you?
No, she wasn't living with me.
When you came back? She was
no,
close by though?
She lived in Rogers Park, actually.
Well, she stayed in Rogers Park? And
yes.
you were living in Highland Park?
I was living in Highland Park, but she would come and stay with me, and the last 2 years of her life she was in a nursing home, but she talked, and then also there was the anguish juxtaposed with the beauty and the people. She talked about what happened to her family, how her parents were gassed. The Germans told her parents they were going to take a shower and they were gassed. She thought she saw a picture of one of them.
How did she find out all these things?
Well, it was after the war. Of course, a lot of things were documented about what happened to the Jews of Munkacs. They were deported to Auschwitz. I did go to the brickyard. They had a very famous brickyard ghetto, which they herded all the people. It was right on the rail line. And so
my daughter just returned. She was living in Israel this last year, and she just returned from a trip to Poland and Czechoslovakia. And she was in Auschwitz and told me stories such as this. Did you have any, you went back there, did you have any fear to see these places?
Well, we went to Budapest first, and that's a book in and of itself, but I do write about that. My father was from a town called Székesfehérvár, which was near Budapest, which of course I wasn't afraid to go to. There's many tourists that go, and we spent a week there. I was afraid, I had a lot of trepidation about going into Ukraine. There was a lot of people were warning us.
You don't want to be there today.
Well, I'll get to that if you remind me later. There is someone who I know of who goes every year in this area.
I know people go every year because the Breslover Hasidim and the Breslover followers who aren't Hasidim go there every year for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Thousands.
To Munkacs?
Go to the grave of the Breslover Rebbe.
Right.
But they go to Ukraine. They go to Ukraine still, even with the duress that's going on there right now. Tell me this, and this is important that I want to know, do you have siblings, first of all?
I have one sister.
You have one sister. Was your sister as interested as you are in this?
No, no, not really. And I find that it's interesting that some people who you think would be interested in about the trip or even learning about it after because they had family from there, they're not so interested. And sometimes people that you don't think would be interested are. So I think it's just a feeling. I had the same feeling to see Eastern Europe, not only Munkacs, but you know, all the place of all the stories of Shalom Aleichem, and if I'm pronouncing it right, Isaac Bashevis Singer, I know he was Polish. These places had been off limits for so long, denied access under the Soviet Union. I really had a desire to see what the landscape looked like, apart from just seeing my mother's town.
And I understand that very much. Tell me, the traveling that your mother did she come by a ship that landed at Ellis Island? How did she come to the United States?
Ellis Island, I believe was
closed already by then?
Closed in the 20s, yeah, 24. She,
really?
she always, yes, yeah, she took her 3 days. She always said it took her 3 days. She had to go to Prague first, which was, you know, the capital of Czechoslovakia, and get her visa, and then from there, she traveled by train to Le Havre and then took a ship, which I just found out not too long ago was called the Washington, and from there went to New York, I believe, and from there she came to Chicago.
Because she had relatives there.
She had relatives in Chicago, and she lived in Chicago for a few years, but for some reason, she was very independent. She decided she wanted to move to New York City.
Clarify to me, was it her brother and sister or brother?
A brother. She had 7 brothers and 1 sister, and her oldest brother and the 1 sister were living here in Chicago.
In Chicago. So did she come to stay with them originally? Did she come to them?
I think she did, yeah. She did live
and
with
are your
her
aunt and uncle still alive today?
No,
everyone's gone,
yeah. Everyone is gone.
Did they share an interest in going back?
No, from my cousins tell me my aunt never wanted to go back. Like many people, they want nothing to do with it. But my mother, maybe it was because she didn't herself experience the horrors of the concentration camps and had really very fond memories of the town.
But she also, as I understand it, she also had guilt.
Yes.
She also had guilt involved in leaving them.
Well, after, of course, the war ended and she found out what happened to her family, she had survivor's guilt. When people talk about survivor's guilt, she felt like she had abandoned them to die alone. And she carried this with her till the day she died. Not long before she died in the nursing home, we were just sitting and chatting like you and I are doing, and she just looked at me and put her hand over her heart and said, you know, it's always with me. What happened to my parents, you know, it hurts. I'll never forget that. It just cut me that, you know, she carried this around, and sometimes she would bring up what happened, and then I would question her, and then she would, you know, change the subject.
So I read the book a long time ago, as you sent it to me months ago already. My memories of my actual reading were your experiences going on your trips. Tell us about your trips to Europe and to Israel, and what you were looking to experience and what you did experience and how it changed you.
Okay, well, if I tell you that this trip really for me was the highlight of my life, and I had traveled a lot, being an expatriate for 5 years, living in Switzerland. I'd been all over Western Europe, but going back to Eastern Europe was just an amazing experience for me. And not only my mother, but when in Budapest we found my paternal grandfather had been an artist, a prominent artist, and we found some of his original sketches in their archives. And so that was very exciting. And I loved hearing Hungarian again, even though I know that there's a resurgence of anti-Semitism.
Oh yes,
there. I know that.
But I do have a quick question I don't want to forget to ask you. Were you able to locate any of your grandparents' cemetery plots while you were in Europe, who died before the war?
Well, no. We did go in Munkacs. There's a town called Odavidhaza. It's a little farming village about 4 miles from Munkacs, where my great-grandmother lived. They had a farm and a little grocery store, and I looked. Our guide took us to the cemetery, but there was nobody there. But anyway, going back to Munkacs, that was a thrill for me. I know a lot of people don't want to go, they don't want to spend their money there, but There is a small but thriving Jewish community there. That
Of
is
people who
being-
returned.
Well,
And
yes,
new
of people,
people.
1 out of 5 people who survived the war from Munkacs returned there. And then I guess after the Soviets relaxed their immigration policy, they left for either the United States or Israel. But our guide took us there. I was nervous. There was some tension at the time. There was some separatist group in Georgia, and the Russians were posturing, kind of like they're doing now, but not as dire. And people told me, oh, be careful. You know, it's very poor, that you have to be very careful. There's a lot of crime. They can kidnap you. So I was nervous going there, but as soon as we crossed the border, and it was a very, once we crossed, it was a 4-hour drive from Budapest to Ukraine, and once we crossed the border into Ukraine, it was maybe 40 minutes. As soon as we arrived in Munkacs, it was just such a lovely little idyllic town. It was the way my mother described it. I really wasn't fearful. And we had a wonderful guide, this Mr. Alex Dunite. He was great. And I had a list of things that I wanted to see. And we found my mother's house.
So the next question, I know you
Yes.
found your mother's house because it's
Yeah,
in the book.
right.
Were you able to tour the house?
Yes.
You met the people
yes.
in the house,
There
didn't
were
you?
2 ladies, a mother and a daughter. They were very kind. And that was a story, because I always knew my mother lived on Music Street, but I never knew the number. And about a year before she died, I just thought I'll ask her, Mother, do you remember the number? Number 20, because my mother was very sharp till the day she died. So I was looking for number 20 Music Street, and when we got to 20 Music Street, I was very crestfallen, because I looked and there was a beautiful brand new yellow 2-story Mediterranean house that obviously belonged to wealthy people, and my mother had drawn a little picture of her house for me. So I knew that this, I thought, okay, they tore down her house, I'm not gonna find her house, and I really was disappointed. But right next door, there was another little house that kind of number 18 that looked like the house in the picture. So Alex, our guide, knocked on the door. 2 ladies came, and good enough, they explained in Ukrainian that that was the original number 20. They had renumbered the houses years prior. And so this was my mother's house. And they were very gracious. It was a Sunday morning, totally unexpected. And a lot of people are fearful. They don't want to let the Jews back in. They're
Right.
afraid that, we're going to try to reclaim
Are there
our
Jews in
property.
that neighborhood still?
What they told us was that after the war, there were many Jews that had returned. It was full of Jewish people, but then, as I said, when the Soviets they emigrated, yeah. But they do have, in Munkacs, they have a brand new little prayer house, a community center. I met the head of the Jewish community. I guess there's 2 factions and they don't get along, but my guide said, no, don't talk about that, and they're supported by the descendants of this famous Hasidic rabbi, Shpira. His descendants are from Brooklyn, live in Brooklyn, and his grandson, they have a big temple in Brooklyn, from what I understand, and there's some wealthy people that keep it going.
The Jewish community.
And they own the Hotel Star too, where we stayed.
Very
Someone
nice.
does, a wealthy business.
Very nice. Now, did your mother or her family members receive compensation after the Holocaust for her family's properties and all that?
I don't. I think a cousin perhaps may have received something, but very minimal. No, not really. I had a few uncles that survived the Hungarian slave labor battalion, and 3 survived and immigrated, and 2 out of the 3 were scarred, really scarred deeply, from the war. So
we're winding down on time,
Okay.
and I really want to hear, tell us all the places you visited and why were they meaningful? Not every single one, because one people read the book,
all right,
but tell
in
us a lot of them. that
Well,
were
in
meaningful.
Budapest, and of course, going to Munkacs, finding my mother's home was wonderful, seeing the Latorica River, just seeing the mountains. We drove up into the mountains, and they're so beautiful. I was very impressed with the beauty of Ukraine. The mountains are very green and pristine. We saw the monastery. There's a monastery that's now a women's convent. My mother always said that her father, who was a timber merchant, sold wood to the monastery, and it's still there. It looks like a castle, like a fairy tale, shades of turquoise, and sitting on a hill overlooking the city. We saw the bricks of a Cheder. They were in the process of removing the old synagogue, which I think may have been repaired since I was there, but at the time it was in a state of complete disrepair. But this was the grand old synagogue. I saw the home where Rabbi Shvira lived. The Corso, oh, I found the drugstore, we think, of where my mother worked. Someone told us that it was the oldest drugstore in town, and it was right on the Corso, and she always said she worked on the Corso, which was the main street. So, a mikveh, there's our Alex pointed out this was a mikveh, the Hebrew gymnasium, which was, you know, the secondary school. It's not, doesn't have Jewish students there anymore. I don't know what it was being used for, but that's still intact. And I recognize it from the pictures. And seeing all these places, I really did not want to leave. I felt like I could have stayed there and just really immersed myself in the city and walked around and explored for a lot longer than I was able to. But.
And so tell us just briefly, what other places on this whole tour of Europe and Israel, did you go?
Well, I'll tell you the thing, I have cousins in Israel, first cousins from, their father was my mother's brother, the one brother that immigrated, and I had always had, we tried to travel to Israel a few times when we lived in Europe, but there was always something going on. I had 3 little kids, and I just wasn't that comfortable traveling with them. But when I saw Eastern Europe, when I saw the devastation, when I stood in the brickyard of this, and saw the ghetto streets, and saw the devastation, and I think that this is when I said I truly had a desire to go to Israel. I needed to see a Jewish country. Yes. After seeing what happened, the diaspora, and I'm just not pronouncing it correctly, I made a boo-boo, my last presentation, because I usually see it written but not hear it pronounced. But the diaspora was destroyed, and the Jewish people have a home now, and it's wonderful.
Do you feel you fulfilled your mother's dream?
Oh, it was, I definitely do. Going back, I wish she had been there with me. People said, well, do you think she would have been upset? And I said, no, I think she would have been really excited, as I was, to see her home again, absolutely.
Well, I can't thank you enough for sharing your story. If you want to find this book, you know, you can ask me any questions by emailing us at info@tvrabbi.com, and I will send it on to Bobby, to Roberta, and she, I know, will send you back an email with any questions you have personally to you. And I want to thank you so much, Roberta Dietzen, for being on our show. I want to thank all of you for being with us. Also, remember, if you want to check out our website, www.tvrabbi.com, you can also see former shows on the web. And I want to thank Roberta, and I want to thank all of you, and hope to see you next time right here on Taped with Rabbi Doug. Be sure to read Gypsy Music Street by Roberta Dietzen. Great book. Thank you so much, and shalom, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Rabbi Doug.
Yeah, I'm talking about Rabbi Doug. Talking about Rabbi Doug. Talking about Rabbi Doug on your TV show. Well, he's the rabbi for me. Anytime you need. You're gonna get married or you're gonna die. Gonna see Rabbi Doug. Gonna see Rabbi Doug. Gonna see Rabbi Doug. Gonna see Rabbi Doug on the TV tonight.
This has been a Tape with Rabbi Doug production.